Welcome to Partnerships for Profit, the podcast where we bring you inside the world of joint ventures, strategic partnerships, and powerful collaborations. Whether you're looking to expand your network, find new referral partners, or scale your business, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to Partnerships for Profit. Today we are joined by Amanda Hynds, who is a National Account Executive at Lexitas Legal. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And can we start off? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Lexitas Legal?
Absolutely. Well, to begin about me, I've been in the industry since 1993. The industry has drastically changed too. I have experience throughout the country. I started off at a small firm in Washington, D.C., and I started off doing personal injury and sex abuse cases, and then graduated into mass torts and have had a plethora of experience in various aspects of personal injury, including owning fractional ownership in medical practices that were focused around personal injury. So the experience and the portfolio is expansive, and I'm blessed. Look, I work for an amazing company. We're a nationwide litigation technology company. We do everything from court reporting, process serving, to trial services, to skip traces, you name it, we do it. And look, our company is about 600 strong nationwide. Oh, wow. And most of us have come from law firms, or what I like to say, reformed attorneys, or the like. And we found that, being in the support part of it is so critical, because look, and I can speak personally, in law school, they do not teach you how to run a business, how to run a firm. So really being an efficient and productive attorney and a business owner or a business provider or service provider are really integral pieces to being successful in our industry. So I sit here before you. That is my the last 10 years of my career have been focused around working with law firms, helping them develop efficiency, or as we like to say in today's world, the KPIs, how to stay ahead of things like tort reform, how to find the great people in our industry to help us all grow and to foster a community of mentorship, and everything around that.
Well, that's great. And that kind of leads into my next question, which my next question was going to be, when people come to Lexitas Legal, what are some of the common pain points and problems that they're experiencing that they are needing Lexitas Legal's help and guidance with?
Absolutely. I mean, the gamut is big because we are nationwide. We work with firms that are 1 to 2 people big, all the way to hundreds of people. We work with legal teams at insurance companies, defense firms. And so, some of them really have a hardcore education where they'll say, look, we really need an integration into this type of software that we have. Can you help us? And they'll have a very dedicated knowledge of what that integration means to them, how it affects their firm or their business, whether it's an insurance company, and what they're looking for. So that's kind of the bigger threshold of what we deal with, all the way down to, the maybe 3 or 4 attorney firm with a couple of staff members that says, hey, we are lean, we are mean, and we need help, and we don't know where to start. So what technology pieces would you recommend? How would you recommend them? And how can we afford them? So it's a big gamut.
Right. And I'm curious, you mentioned that early on you were in the personal injury space and focusing on sexual abuse cases. Was there anything that sort of prompted that shift into focusing on mass torts?
No, I mean, look, mass torts is a beast, right? When you run a mass tort campaign overnight, you could foster, 600 new leads. One of the big mass tort cases that's happening now, which is very relevant to most parents, is the Roblox case. The average 8 to 18-year-old and some even adults are playing this game called Roblox. And I would say it's a modern version of Tetris, for us adults. And look, there's a chat feature in it. And there is an easy way to, penetrate the confidentiality boundary and get to these kids that are playing with it.
Right.
And unfortunately, very unfortunate things happen when these predators get into these circles and who they're dealing with. And so, you can launch a campaign overnight. You can have 600 new potential cases, and how to set that up quickly, how to afford that, right?
Right.
So it's working with people like that to, one, help them identify pieces of the campaign, help them to identify components of intake, whether it's bringing in temporary employees to help manage that flow, whether it's providing a service to set up all of the medical records collection aspects of getting that case together. And look, sex abuse cases are very, very different from personal injury the standard car accident case. Because you put a medical records request in a sex abuse case, traditionally it's going to be to a school or to a psychiatrist or a counselor. It's not your traditional medical request. So really having that knowledge to be able to sink in, to develop a program or a solution that's going to service that firm or those firms, if it's a collection of firms, is critical in terms of the success. And look, because mass tort cases are a huge risk in terms of, one, qualifying that case, and knowing, does it have value? Is it ripe for the case or ripe for the class? And will it bring value into the case is really, really challenging. So it's a very big risk to go out on a limb, to bring that case in, to spend money to show that it is ripe for the case, and then move forward.
Right.
So mass torts, like I said, is a very different animal, but an amazing animal, right? Because it identifies a massive problem. You know, a video game like Roblox, if anyone remembers when it launched, it went widespread very quickly.
Oh, sure.
It was a new release, and so every kid had to have it,
Right.
So it's the equivalent to when the Sears catalog came out. We all had to have the marker to circle every toy we wanted in it, or the Montgomery Ward catalog. And so really, when you see a product that hits market that quickly, that successfully, and the potentials of what it could do or what it could impact on your family and in your home and in that child's life, and how quickly it can happen, is really, really key.
Right.
And then being able to react to it, be able to respond to it, and most importantly, to get justice.
Right. And it's funny that you bring up Roblox, because there are in-game purchases that you buy, and Robux are, I believe, on my nephew's Christmas list this year. So there you go.
Yeah, and listen, hey, I have an 11-year-old, and in fairness, last Christmas, he put that on his Christmas list, and I didn't even realize it, but he collected $600 in
Wow.
Robux.
Wow.
And when I found it, I said, hey, we need to figure out how to buy stock in this. This is, if we're going to drop this much money on in-app purchases, we need to have a conversation about this. So look, there's a lot of revenue coming into that door, and a lot of potential. And the fact that there aren't more safety guards is something that really should be questioned, should be challenged.
Now, you mentioned that Lexitas Legal really is helping firm owners and businesses with sort of technology-enabled legal support services. Are there ever any firm owners, or just firms in general, that you run into that are maybe wary to integrate new technologies because they've been operating the same way so long that there's some sort of, barricade to that?
Of course. I mean, look, if you look back, my first job in law in 1993, I was one of the first people in the firm to get a electronic typewriter. And I had 2 lines of an LCD screen, which back then was a massive gift. I was the coolest person in the firm. And there was an expectation with that kind of an upgraded toy. And back then we looked at a piece of paper, we held it up to the light, and we checked the watermark, because there was a craft, a respect level to the industry. Now, with all the technology pieces that we have, the craft in this is really knowing which tool, which technology piece is the best for me, the best for my firm, and the best for the type of law I practice. Because if you're out there doing medical malpractice cases, or a mass tort case that has something to do with healthcare, like a systemic issue. So let's talk about Camp Lejeune, right? Camp Lejeune is, it takes many years for the signs of Camp Lejeune to show up in a person's health history. Putting together 10 years, 20 years of medical records is a daunting task. To put together a medical chronology on that, circa 5 years ago, could have taken hours and deep concentration and expertise. Now we have tools which are AI driven, or NLP, natural language processing driven, which can take 20,000 pages of medicals and churn them into a beautiful, organized medical chronology for a couple $100 maybe. And you can hit buttons on it or hyperlinks. So if you want to run just a search on something like a herniation or a specific level herniation, you can click that link and it will recategorize and give you a whole timeline just focused around that subject matter, which, listen, 10 years ago, that was highlighters in 6 different colors. If you remember those miserable little Post-it tags with the arrows and different color codes, and to identify to us, to a human, what is this? What is that? A key code. And look, there was a lot of error back there, because if you were working on something 10, 12 hours, it's common to get tired. It's common to miss things. And look, it's very common where when you start to read something, that your body actually creates, or your mind creates, a story around it. It creates what you want to read. So there's a lot of human error focused around that. And when you can take something and, instead of investing that kind of time into it, or expense associated with that time, and hit a button, and within an hour or sometimes shorter, have a beautiful summary, you're able to manipulate that summary and take it forward, is a gift, right? And, for some of these mass tort cases, when you're qualifying the case. So we'll talk about Ozempic cases, right? That's another big hot topic. Everybody wants the magic drug, right? Everybody wants to get skinny. Those cases, you have to qualify. So instead of looking at, instead of the event already occurring on a specific date and having, dedicated knowledge of that, you're digging to say, okay, what has happened with this party's drug usage? And I mean that with Ozempic, their usage of Ozempic, that qualifies them for having experienced the negative effects of this drug. So things like gastroparesis. So to be able to, again, take 10,000 pages of medical records, put them into a technology tool where it pulls out every instance of where the patient had gastroparesis, or client had gastroparesis. That's a big gift too, because you'll see, okay, there was 9 events. The patient or client spent 3 days in the hospital because they were so ill. That allows the attorney or the team to say, the likelihood of this person or this client being ripe for this case is right here. We've got the qualifiers. It's much easier to identify than, again, digging through and finding all of these things. And look, I focus on the medical chronology aspect of it because, look, medical records and chronologies really are what help us define the case, right? Without detailing. So one, it defines whether they have a case. And then it defines what our damages are, right? Our pain and suffering are, what are our medical expenses? What is this party, or this, I say it loosely because it's a client or a patient, depending on which side we're observing it from. What is their lifespan going to look like for long-term care? Right. So, and look, if it's somebody on Ozempic, let's say they lost some weight. They had gastroparesis, but they lost weight. So, ideally their cholesterol levels, or their heart disease qualifiers went down. So they got healthier, even though they got really sick from it. And we know that once they get off of it, they're potentially going to gain that weight back. So it's looking at the whole package of it, right? What was the injury? How did it affect them? And then what's going to happen after the fact? Right.
And, you mentioned sort of, and I mean, we've kind of talked a bit about how these technologies can kind of, improve efficiencies and clarity of information. But in what ways do those elements sort of translates into minimizing profit loss and maximizing profits for these firms?
Yeah, it's funny you say this. So I recently had a client call me. They're pulling together records for a case where there was a chemical that was it was found in a water supply, and so the effect of this chemical was systemic. So the chemical gets into the body and eventually will develop into what I call soft tissue cancers. So
Mm,
kidney, liver cancer. So it's not something that shows up quickly. It shows up long term. The challenge for that is there is a spectrum of how sick these patient clients get. Okay, so if their exposure was more versus less, they're obviously much more inclined to have a much more aggressive cancer or have more cancer, or grow cancer quicker, right? So it's a quicker response versus the ones that didn't have an intense or high level exposure. When you get into the cases where there wasn't as much exposure, but there was a substantial amount of damages, that person is equally as important in this world as the person who's suffering from stage 4 or terminal cancer.
right.
So being able to take resources and still qualify that client, it's still critical. But because you're really operating on a fine line, you have to be very cautious with the money you're spending.
Right.
Because if you get into it and there's not enough money to cover the situation, you're doing the client a tremendous disservice. So there are firms out there, and look, the firm that I was speaking with, there were actually two different firms. One is a substantial firm out of Texas and California, and the other one's in Louisiana. And they're both carrying a pretty sizable chunk of clients. And, the entire team said, look, the ones that are very clear cut, stage 4 cancers, we have that down pat. It's the ones that we know there's been an effect. We know they have exposure, but we need to qualify because look, at the end of the day, when you have long-term exposure like that, you have to rule out, were they working on a shipyard? Were they
Right.
exposed to any other substance that could have exacerbated that condition on top of that? Or let's say they have, liver cancer. Are they smoker? All of these potential comorbidities that could have been of choice, right?
Right.
From the person's perspective, could have impacted this condition. And is the condition truly caused from the exposure of this chemical or not?
Right.
So that's where it gets really tough. And operating, and look, so there's all kinds of ways to do medical record collection. And when you're looking at something with long-term exposure, you could have easily 20 to 40,000 pages of medical records from 10 to 15 providers. That's a lot. So being able to take the chunk, summarize it into a quick outline, and take that from the preliminary, and then let's say they are ripe for the class, let's say they do fit into it, then be able to take that summary and deep dive into it later on is really critical, because then you can weed out, if you know on the spectrum, they're on the spectrum, they're on the lower end of the spectrum because their exposure was less. But what does that mean? So if we're on a scale of 1 to 5, is that a 1, or is that more like a 3 or a 2.5? And then being able to, to basically draft a life care plan on what this is going to look like for their future and bring it as part of the case.
Right. And I mean, that's pretty insanely in-depth case usage. I'm curious, was there a moment, throughout your career where you really realized and were able to identify either a practice or a habit that this right here is why law firms struggle? And if so, how did that realization sort of help shape the way that you support law firms today?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, so I've had a really interesting career. So in my 20s, in undergrad, I worked for a very prominent attorney in Washington, D.C., and we had several pretty high profile cases. And one case in particularly, I would say burned me out, right? So I focused my career for a few years more on the business side of things. And I decided it wasn't for me. I decided that law was for me. It was the only thing I was going to do. And it called me back in somewhat of an unhealthy way. Right. And I mean that with respect, but so I ended up going to law school late in life. And here's the challenge. Look, what I learned, because I had this perspective, right? Growing up, I was so blessed to have amazing mentors. And I thought they were all smart and great businessmen, right? They knew how to manage money and they knew how to fight for clients and they knew how to read things like medical records if they didn't have a knowledge on. And, it built up so much respect for me. And what I realized was they don't teach you business in law school. They don't teach you efficiency. They teach you the basics of law, not even the practice of law. So, as an adult, when I could look at it and see the culmination really was, hey, you have to be a successful attorney, you really have to pay attention at an acute level to business, to having a basic knowledge of many subjects. So a jack of all trades, right? So that, if you have a client that comes in that it's a sex abuse case, it's still a personal injury case. Or if you have a client that comes in that was involved in a case where a semi hit them, or a case where your child went to school and some other kids left a pencil on the seat and that pencil penetrated the child's, let's say, the lower extremities in a very damaging way and caused significant harm. So having a knowledge of things like, okay, how does a semi work? What are the physics of a semi fully loaded and the impact on a car, the type of car, whether it's a pickup truck or a small Honda Civic, and versus the semi being full or empty, and that, those dynamics. What is the differentiation? Like the way a child's body functions when it's been severely interrupted versus an adult's, they're not the same. How to handle that. Like, so what I mean, having a knowledge of many things. So look, there's a lot of respect in our industry, having a broad knowledge of many things. Because even if you're not going to practice it exclusively, if you're going to call in experts and co-counsel, you have to have the knowledge to get to that. Who are you bringing in? What expertise? How are you going to put this together? So, realistically, I would say being in I would say my 30s and early 40s and saying, wow, this is having a broad knowledge, being able to access the right people and pulling it all together was, I would say, the key component to that.
Right. Well, and, to go off that point a little bit, right? Finding the right people and that being a crucial element. Can we talk a little bit about when a law firm owner, say they have need of, a group like Lexitas Legal, and they need the help and guidance of someone like Lexitas Legal, but they don't pursue it. What does that look like for them?
I know those clients, and usually when they come to us, it's at the 11th hour, and they realize they've gotten themselves into a pinch, and a lot of that is with trial services. It's, hey, I have a trial in X amount of days. I don't know what to do. I need help, and it's a humbling experience, right? Because that's when you see, and look, it's one of the greatest moments and one of the most challenging moments, right? Because you can take a situation that's dwindling and really put it back together. And when you see the potential and the tools and the skills out there, it's fantastic. Look, I mean, our trial services team, I'm fascinated by them. I feel like I'm that kid. It's that kid that you stare in the window and you're watching someone and you just think they're the coolest person in the entire world. And, maybe it's their clothing or what they say or what they do. And even at this point in my career, I'm still in awe of what I see our teams pull together. And we have several teams throughout the country. So, to watch them come in and to look at some of the cases that we are so blessed to support. Our list is, we have a very a famous list, which we're blessed to have because that means we're pretty well respected and trusted in the industry. And really to be able to turn an entire case around. And look, I use that on a big scale. But I've even had scenarios where, I have a law firm come to me. They, we have an integration into their case management software. Maybe they've had rapid growth in a year. And just to be able to take off 10 to 15 hours of administrative time off of their team each week. I've watched how something as small as that can have such a massive impact. So it can be really big and expansive, like litigation support on a trial, or it can be as small as doing an integration. And look, so with our integrations for court reporting, if you book a deposition with us, everything automates into your case file. So instead of copying and pasting and emailing as a paralegal to everyone on your team, it just auto-populates.
Right.
So you're eliminating all these menial tasks, which, even in today's day, we're so ahead of the game. 1993, everything was a Post-it, or a memo on your desk. It was barely an email back then. And so to see something where, and look, back then we actually walked to the courthouse. We filed the demand with the clerk. Now we hit send.
Right.
So, and look, it might be at 11:59 at night. Whereas before it was 4:59 p.m. and you're begging the clerk, please let me in. So there's a lot of perks to what we have now. And look, Lexitas is huge. And our specialty is, bringing firms to the next level with technology and support.
Right. Now, this might be a big loaded question, so bear with me here. But when you think back on your career and you think back on all of the clients and law firm owners and businesses that you have helped, can you share with our listeners a story of someone, either a client, a business, a law firm owner, that you really saw a positive transformation in as a result of your help and guidance? Is there one?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's many. And look, that is one of the gifts of this business, right? It's, I meet people every day, and naturally I say, what do you do? Right? It's conversational. And some of them love what they do, and some of them have kind of, hit a wall.
Right.
And I'm always fascinated by that. And look, I'm so blessed because, I have such a renewed spirit about it, right? And our industry's changed, like I said, from 1993 to the 2000s, and from 2000 to 2010. And look, I'm in Florida, and we were lucky enough to, I sarcastically say, to experience tort reform a few years ago, which was, a lot of us had 6 weeks to draft hundreds of demands, which was a challenging time. So, I would say the biggest impact for the last few years is working with these mid-tier firms that, went out on a limb, invested in a case management software program. And look, when you do that, it's an abrupt action, because you're taking systems that you've worked with for years, and they might be very informal systems. You're trusting in a software, you're spending exorbitance of money and time inputting all of this in to the software. You're praying that you get the value back. You're praying that your teams will use it and not become overwhelmed. You're praying, it's a risk, right? It's a financial risk, it's an efficiency risk. And so to be able to walk into a firm, and I have an amazing firm within the last 6 months. And what we do is, so I like to do, because I'm very business minded, I like to go in, I like to do an integration, and then I like to run metric reports so that I can show the teams, the firm, the administrator, or the CSO, whatever they have, whoever's controlling the firm, whether it's a managing partner or it's somebody independent, where I can show that, prior to the integration, they were spending X amount of hours on a task. And after the integration and after successful implementation and training, that they're spending fractions of the original amounts of time. And the funny part is once you get a firm into this type of efficiency, you actually have to work with their staff to redirect them, right? And I use this explanation. So I remember in my 20s, I used to stand next to a photocopier, right? It was critical in personal injury. And I used to joke, I used to dream about what we now call a walking pad today, right? It's this little treadmill that you can buy, and you can put it next to your desk, and you can sit and, you could do podcasts while you're on the walking path, right? And so nobody can see from here down because you got this little mini treadmill. And I used to sit in front of this photocopy machine for hours, photocopying, and I'd say, I need a treadmill, right? I need a treadmill so bad I could stand here and exercise in the whole 9 yards. And so, now we have all of these things which have pulled us away from all of that inefficiency, right? All these tools, all these little pieces to it that morphed us to today. And so, where I used to spend hours in front of a photocopier, if you took that away from me back then, I wouldn't know where to go. I would be lost for a little bit, right? And so I'm working with teams now to say, okay, great. Well, we've taken the administrative, the non-revenue generating hours, and we've minimized them. So do you want to split the team and put the team into greater intake? Do you half team in marketing, half in intake, and re-guide that person or that team's time into whether it's revenue generating or whatever it is, or maybe you take on a new mass tort, another one, or maybe you take on another area of law. So it's all of this opportunity opening up. And it's really amazing to see that, but to watch the shift. And look, I'm one of them, right? It took me when technology started to come out, it was really tough. I mean, even just getting to an electric typewriter, which sounds ridiculous, it was a hard transition. It was trust. And now, if you look at the tools that Lexitas is using today, I mean, we have video recognition software. So we can take deposition videos and actually assess whether the party is experiencing emotion.
Wow.
And so really, and it's so cool to watch that, to unfold. So to work with those teams and say, hey, look, you have these tools now. You have a lot more efficiency now. Let's shift. Let's look at how this changes the impact of your firm, the impact of your teams day to day. And I use the word teams because, look, you can have a firm that does personal injury, auto accidents, and then they're split. Part of the firm will only do traumatic brain injury accidents. Part of the firm will only do med-mal. So those are independent teams, and they're each run very differently. So it's and working with one firm that encompasses more than one of those subject matters is very important and very specific.
Right. Well, Amanda, this has been an incredible conversation. If anybody out there listening could use your help and guidance, could use the help of Lexitas Legal, where can the people find you?
I would love it. I'm all over. Listen, please look me up, Amanda Hynds. My last name is spelled Hy. N as in Nancy, D as in David, S as in Sam. I'm a national account executive for Lexitas. Please feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to hearing from you and potentially working with you.
Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been awesome.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Partnerships for Profit, presented by LeDuc Entertainment. Amanda, thank you so much again.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Partnerships for Profit. We hope you've gained valuable insights on how to form profitable partnerships and take your business to the next level. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. Got a partnership story to share or someone you'd like to see featured on the show? Reach out to us. Until next time, keep building those partnerships for profit.